Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, which is actually episode 22 of Strathmore Business School webinar series. Our webinar today is themed post-COVID recovery and HR leadership. So in the next 1.5 hours, we will be seeking to redefine HR in the emerging new normal. My name is Agnes Rora, and I'm going to be the moderator for this webinar. I'm also a faculty at Strathmore Business School, and I have our 4 panelists who are also here in our midst. But before we delve deep into the conversation, I want to just highlight a few housekeeping norms to help us really have a great online experience. So the first one is a kind request to all of you, all of us, to stay muted unless you're speaking. I expect that for the bulk of the time, it will be the panelists or myself speaking. So I beg that the rest of us stay muted. I also would like to request that we have our videos off, just to ensure that we don't cause distractions. The other thing I would like to just highlight is that we're going to, this webinar is being recorded, and we are going to share this recording on our website and also on our YouTube channels. So rest assured that you're going to receive a copy of it. And I'm supported by the team from Strathmore Business School, Richard, Caroline, and Joe Harvey, and Francis, just to ensure that we have a good experience and that they're going to also monitor our chat. So as we begin, I invite you all, and really thank you for being part of this webinar. I invite you to use the chat function for your comments, your questions, and I will be monitoring the chat. But before we begin, I want to confirm that you can hear me, or because if you can't, then chances are high you will be hearing the panelists. So just use the function, the chat function, to say hi to everyone, just confirming also perhaps where you're dialing in from, and we shall be ready to start once I get a signal that you can hear me and you're responding on the chat that indeed you can. Great, thank you, Alexander, for confirming. Awesome. So I believe that we are happy and great and ready to start. So I'll kick off by introducing our panelists. In our midst, we have 4 panelists. So I'll start with the lady, being one among the men. In our midst, we have Emma Crompton, an executive coach and a consultant, founder of EFA People Consulting, has been in the HR practice offering consulting solutions for over 15 years. I'm sure it's more than that, Emma. And one of her primary roles at EFA is implementing HR solutions as a consultant across cultures and also across sectors. So she will be driving the conversation, borrowing from her experience from private sector, NGO, and also from government perspectives. We also have John Mwendwa, who is the HR director of Coca-Cola. John has many years of experience in HR, has worked for blue chip companies, besides Coca-Cola, has worked for Unilever, and is bringing in a wealth of experience, mainly from the manufacturing sector. And so we are really looking forward to listening in from him and his experiences. We also have Fred Gituku, who is the head of HR at Vivo Energy. Similarly, Fred has a wealth of experience also working in corporate Kenya for several decades, and is also serving on board in board capacity. So we would also like to hear it from a governance perspective and really HR leadership from that level, Fred. And we have a CEO in our midst. We have Edward Mungai, who's the CEO of Kenya Climate Innovation Center. We thought that it would be great to hear from the HR practitioners and as well from really at the top of the organization where you're crafting strategies and really thinking business continuity. So you'll be giving us perspectives of how the HR then can plug in and operationalize these strategies and guide the HR practices that are going to really take us to the new normal. So welcome to all our panelists. I'm going to really take a deep dive, and I'm going to start with you, John. I know you're being in the manufacturing sector. Of course, business was heavily affected by, lockdowns and stuff related to movement, either of goods and staff. But just quickly, you could probably tell us the effects of COVID-19 to business, and particularly to the HR way of doing things.
Thanks, Agnes, and everyone. Welcome, everyone. I said the impact of business can be, or has been said a lot to be, on the business from a point of revenues. But when I reflect on COVID, it has affected what people believed could be and what could not be. So when you look at 2020 business plans, what people thought would be their growth trajectories and what people thought would be their revenues and profitability and their spend on CapEx and people development, that change has come fast to the mindset. So there's lots of things that I see in my industry people thought they cannot live without, which they easily live with without now. And it's not just within the four walls where the change is happening. A lot of the changes is happening outside of the four walls where the consumer is. So consumer behavior has changed, and it's not just the willing to buy or unwilling or willing not to buy, but the change on how they want the goods delivered to them. So this is having a lot of impact in choice of point of sale or channel of sale. So that's an impact that I see a lot from a business point of view. From an impact on HR is, I think most organizations, and we're not immune to it, were caught flat-footed on how they would respond, particularly with a changing consumer behavior. So we thought that consumer behavior will be incremental to what we have. They now need one packet or one bottle of soda. Now they'll need two, but all of a sudden they need the soda from a different channel. So building new capability, building new culture from a HR point of view has been the impact. So I've seen HR sort of step into craft an interim purpose for the organization, and some of it is as close to the heart as ensuring safety, and others is just ensuring continuity, ensuring that people have jobs. So I see HR stepping up to define the new culture and also reshape an interim purpose for the organizations.
Very interesting, John. You talk of a new culture and changing consumer behaviors. So perhaps before I get deep into the HR context, I'd like to hear from Edward. From the top of the organization, when you're leading and steering the ship, what has this impact been for you, and how does it affect how you would want HR to really support you?
Well, thank you very much, Agnes, and good afternoon, everybody. Well, I guess I'm speaking to HR practitioners, and I guess my point here is the easiest because I'm just going to share with you, well, not frustrations, but more expectations that I would expect a HR director or a HR manager to be working on. And I guess starting from my understanding, well, HR have its own objectives. And you guys, you are doing a great job in meeting the objectives that you have from the organization. Sometimes I find that you are only concentrating on what is HR and forgetting that the organization has its own objective. So one critical element, and especially now that we have COVID-19, we're in a crisis, I think what is important is that for HR practitioners, not to see themselves more from the operational side of things, but to move themselves into the strategic perspective. And I would like to see more contribution from the HR departments or HR directors into the conversation about the strategy of business. And why do I say this? I say this because obviously 70 to 80%, and this is well documented, guys, 70 to 80% of the time of HR people is spent on operations. Kind of leave management, is about talent, is about, you know, kind of very operational issues. But with COVID, I think we need to move away because the priorities, our businesses have changed. And how are our businesses changing? And speaking from a CEO perspective, I guess one of the key elements that I'm saying for the HR people is that you are the ones now on the front line. This is an opportunity, you know, we are being reminded, and in truth it is, that nurses, doctors are on the front line of the COVID crisis. But I would like to urge you guys to see yourself as the one actually within our organization who are on the front line. Why are you on the front line? Because you need to help us to resolve issues within our organization. And what are these issues? The first one, a critical one, and again, something that we need to put a lot of effort on. We've been told it is taking bearing in our organization is about mental health and well-being. Well, this is not your forte. This is something that normally you send us to the consultants, to the counselors, but now you have to place yourself into that space where you will be talking about issues of mental health. You will ensure that even if you are working from home, we are taking the opportunity to exercise, for instance, for our well-being. And there need to be tools that you need to put in place that then should be able to help you to monitor and to make sure that these things are happening, so that then productivity can still remain as it were before the COVID-19, if not better. The second thing, obviously, is we've been remote working. I can assure you, since 17th of March, I've not stepped into my office. I've been working at my desk. That is what is called remote working in its true colors. And again, I know this is what is happening with your organization. The question is, what are you doing to make sure that this remote working is not actually affecting us? For instance, normally where I work, I spend about 45 minutes having lunch and having conversations with people. Now, the distance between my office and my dining room, I can assure you, is less than 30 seconds to get there. Of course, that have some consequences. And these are some of the consequences. As HR practitioners, you need to start figuring out how can we be able to still keep these people going and ensure that they are doing their best. Of course, investments. And this, again, is something that COVID have shown us. I would like to see my HR director coming up with a strategy in terms of how can he or how can the organization be able to help the staff to have investment in what I call home offices. Because in the beginning, well, it was a huge challenge. Some of my people are working from their beds, you know, and going forward, this is the norm. This is the new normal. Probably will be working at home for many hours. So there is need to put incentives, there is need to put investment. Well, it could be staff loans or these kind of things where we can enable our staff to obviously be able to work from home. Of course, things like security, you working with the IT people and making sure that the digital world is converging in our homes and we are secure. Because of course, security is another issue. Now, I have been fighting a lot with some HR practitioners and also in my organization about something called agility. I think this is the time that HR practitioners, you need now to encourage, and you need the tools that will help us to get into agility. One simple tool that probably I have used for many years and I'm recommending it is what is called Scrum methodology. Guys, look out what is Scrum methodology. Is the act of doing twice the work in half the time. This is the time we need this kind of tools for agility and to be able to succeed. Very quickly, I also talk about communication. You need also to help us in terms of communicating well on a daily basis. Is there like a summary of how we are being informed, what is happening to our staff, what is happening to our business? Like there's calling, you know, there's systems where we can be able to know how our people doing. Of course, as a manager, as a CEO, I need to change my name because the leadership is changing. And it's only HR who can help us to navigate to that change. And how is it changing? Well, we need to refocus it. And we need to concentrate on things of empathy. We need to talk about compassion. We need to talk about understanding. And I want to move not being called a chief executive officer, courtesy of the HR people, but to be called a chief empathy officer, where I can be able to listen to people and see what are their challenges and actually address those challenges. And finally, I would also request that HR to reinvent themselves. As I said, you are the front line leaders within our organization, and you must be seen to help people, not only to be seen, but you must be able to help people. Agnes, I want to stop there. I know I can talk and I will probably take it over later on, but I want to stop at that point and then probably we can have more intimate conversation later.
In fact, Edward, you have set the expectations for this session. Anne, who is in the audience, is reminding me that, in fact, this is not just a place for HR. We have communications experts, and you've talked about communication. You've talked about agile methodologies, which really is not the forte of HR, but technology. And you have even talked about well-being psychology, which is drawing everyone away from the core mandate or the core value chain that we traditionally knew HR to be. So I want to turn to Fred. I mean, I'm just feeling like HR is now going to be all over the place. It's not going to be an office in a corner where people talk about operations and just rewards, retention. And Fred, you can probably get deeper into telling us what are some of the topical issues around HR. Edward has talked about them. John talked about consumer behavior, and for a moment I thought we are drifting into marketing, but we are in a HR conversation. What are the topical issues that you're seeing? What are the opportunities you're coming across, and some of the challenges you're also facing?
I hope you can hear me, Agnes.
Yes, Fred, I can.
I don't know whether you can see me though.
I can.
Oh, very well. So I think there's a lot to say concerning what you mentioned. But some of the things that have begun appearing lately that will be noticeable by virtually everybody is the way the work culture is changing. Now, there's been a sudden acceleration of the trend towards remote working. And obviously, while this was in the works from some time ago, we know that we have been forced to adopt it a bit faster than we would have ordinarily. And as you might agree with me, this virus does not seek anybody's permission to invade and intrude into our lives or in businesses. So we've had to be forced to be ready to adopt working from home, to have to leverage technology that may not have been entirely sufficient, but it will have to do. Having to, and I refer to part of what Edward was saying, discover greater uses of dining tables and perhaps even beds, that suddenly we are having to work from home, children are around, they are making noise, the dog is barking, a spouse is yelling, you've got to deal with all of this. So the fact that we've seen a sudden acceleration towards remote working is a trend that everybody can see. But I think beyond that, and also, as I mentioned, the need for digital literacy, where I think the number of people who can dial into Zoom now is significantly bigger than those who could at the beginning of the year. That may sound simple, but it is something that we've had to learn. But more importantly, the way we are leading our people. Line managers have had to learn how to lead at a distance. And it has meant that, therefore, they are not sitting right next to the people who report to them. And they are slowly beginning to discover the value of the commodity of trust. That someone is in their house, you're not monitoring them the same way you would monitor them if they were in the office, but there you are. You've got to start thinking micromanagement is something that is going to be a lot harder if anyone is given to that. So how do we manage from a distance? How do we now start managing people and realizing we've got to trust them? We don't have a choice. The virus has said so, at least for the time being. We are forced to have to do that. And also, there's another trend about having to step back and value some of the things we took for granted. I think people are very excited initially about working from home, and then you suddenly discover that the human connections you make in the office are important. And after a couple of months, people start saying, I want to go back to the office, not because the furniture there is great necessarily or suitable, but because they are colleagues you want to talk to. And there's something about being next to someone when you're talking to them that makes a difference. So the human connection, just stepping back and seeing that that's an important element of the experience of work and experience in life in general. And it has also given leaders a big opportunity to embrace what Edward was referring to as empathy. I mean, this is not the time you expect people to behave exactly as they would have if they were right next to you. There are many things to understand. There are many situations to appreciate. There are difficulties people are facing. And if I can just mention some of them, some people have faced their demise as a result of the virus. Others know people who have died, and therefore that has affected them. Some people are very worried about the virus, and obviously that brings in the subject of mental wellness. And some people are just anxious about whether it might just be them who are going to be next. So people are dealing with all of this. Some people have said tongue in cheek that I want to go back to the office because, you know, I think it's a lot harder to deal with domestic issues. Now, I leave it to them, but the truth is we have had to change the way we work and to a large extent the way we live as a result of this pandemic. And I don't think there's any sector that has not been affected by that. The other thing I would mention is that there's been a drift towards reassessing our own assumptions about a number of things in HR. Succession planning, before you are thinking, okay, this gentleman looks like he can take over a certain position after some time. But now you're not just thinking about whether he's growing towards a particular position and how well you're supporting them to get there. What you're also thinking about now is this person is vulnerable. He may be here today and not here next week. So you're not just thinking about succession in the same way. You're thinking about it more also in terms of business continuity planning, because there's nobody who is not susceptible to coronavirus. And let's face it. So we've had to think also in terms of how vulnerable we are as individuals and as workers as well. We have been forced to think about mortality a bit more right now, and therefore what truly matters in our lives. This may not have something to do with work, but it does have something to do with our lives. So we are thinking more about, I am truly vulnerable. And also the extent to which organizations can have confidence in future has also been tested. Can you for sure say that then in the next 3 years, this is where I will be? Now we are a lot more reluctant to say that this is where I will be in the next 3 years. And a lot more contingency planning comes into the picture, because you're saying, what if? And we have now this what if thinking a lot more than we would have before. The other thing is we think about contracts for employees. Now, what is permanent? I mean, you're employed today. If you're one of the employees who are in the sector that is folding, then of course, employment stops. The way we view contracts also, that changes. The assumptions we make up when we're employing people, that changes. The investment we make in workplace infrastructure. How much of an office do I really need? So how much rent should I be paying? Does it matter where I set up my office? The other thing is just to think about this virtual world. I think previously, people used to think virtual more in terms of IT people. Now everybody has had to reflect on what the virtual world is like. And when a time like now that the chips are down is when we have had to see whether leaders really are about profit or people. Are they considering the wellness of people as they also think about the profit? Are they thinking about EBITDA as they think about empathy? Is it all about cash flows, or is it about compassion? We've been forced to rethink our assumptions about work and the way we work. One last thing I'll say, there's a lot to say, but you know, Agnes, one last thing I'll say is the way we attract talent. There's now no borders concerning where you might get talent. If there's somebody in Cambodia who's prepared to work for you, they don't need immigration passage to make a contribution to your organization. The truth is, so long as they have a connection, so long as they are capable, so long as they are keen to join your organization, they can. They don't need to go to Nyayo House to get approvals to come and work for you. That's not there. So the ubiquity of talent is probably going to be around because of the fact that people are embracing a lot more virtual working than before. There are many trends, some of them more significant than others, but for me, I think the ones that I'm talking about are specifically probably driven more by COVID than just by the evolution of what is happening in the world of HR.
Thank you very much, Fred. In fact, you've talked of the evolution. Many people, when COVID hit, we thought we were waiting for a moment when we can go to the normal we were used to. Now we all of a sudden realize there's no going back. So I probably would want to call on Emma to tell us what are some of the things that pathfinding organizations are really doing to help us really make this leap. Emma, what are some of the things you're observing?
Thanks, Agnes. It's great to be here. Yeah, as you've talked about, obviously, we've talked a lot about the new normal. There was a Harvard article I read recently, and it's talking about the next normal. So getting used to the fact that we're not even looking at all of their remote staff, which around the world, and how they've been working over the last few months. And they did this using surveys, and they had obviously the benefit of Microsoft 365. So what they found was that they were having more meetings, but the meeting ran in a much shorter time. So most of the meetings were 30 minutes or less. And then they were having more individual meetings between, line managers and their teams, their individuals. Then they were also having, their engineering teams were having what they were calling Recharge Fridays, which was an opportunity for the engineering teams to say, actually, we're not having any meetings. They were Zoomed out or Microsoft Teamed out, I guess. You know what it's like. You're looking at the screen for so long, and it's too much on the eyes at times. So that was something they found has been happening. And then they've also been focusing a lot more on mindsets, more than just outcomes, recognizing the stress and the trauma that many people have been going through, as has been alluded to by other panelists. Then the second organization I wanted to highlight is Virgin Media, which is in the UK. And what they've really been doing is they've been focusing on inclusion a lot more, also responding obviously to what's been happening with Black Lives Matter, well-being as well, which has become a much bigger issue. Obviously not just about health and safety, but there's big issues when it comes to well-being and wellness now as well. And I think the obligation is more on employers now as well. So that is quite a key area. And they've also been looking at retraining their employees. So for example, they have engineers that they're not able to use. So they've been retraining them to work in customer service. And they've been having much more temporary contracts, which of course that is natural, and that is a trend that we're going to be seeing more of, I think. Then the third organization I wanted to highlight is called the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Inevitably they have staff in London, but they also have staff in Uganda and also in Gambia. And they've obviously been very focused on serving the health sector, and they've been trying to build a high trust model. And the way they've done that is really cutting out bureaucracy, and so cutting out a lot of long-winded processes to really try to empower people and to make very quick decisions. We're in a very fast-moving environment. Things are very volatile. The strategies you had for 2020, as was already said, is completely gone. So there's a need to keep on reforecasting what is happening. And also virtual coffee sessions for new staff to try and build the sense of community in different ways, trying to use different digital platforms for collaboration, but to try to build up for the fact we don't have that physical connection. So to use a lot of creativity. So those were the three organizations, Agnes, I wanted to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. And I would like to hear from John. You know, John, you're out on the hot seat. You're expected to be driving the new practices that Emma is talking about. What advice would you give to the people who are here?
I think for me, I want to really start with the people are sort of craving for a normal. And I don't think normal as we've known it will not come back. And I really want to say that people expect the normal to come because they want to craft it. They want to craft how the new normal will look like, as opposed to being thrust into this space where they have to discover themselves. So the change from a desire of normal should actually become nobody's ambition, and rather start to craft a leadership. And I think it's Edward was talking at the beginning, talking about us being in the front line, and the front line that I see HR playing is crafting that leadership that will mold workplaces of the future. So there's no success of business if we're going to end up without employees, and there's no success of employees if we're going to end up without business. So my advice is that the HR needs to craft a leadership that's empathic. So empathy will become a competence as a requirement for leadership. People need to start thinking of success as opposed to survival. And HR needs now to start leading in crafting the workplace of the future. Because I believe, honestly believe that there's no other future we're waiting for. So if it's agility, if it's a change of how people expect to work. So the one thing that I see that HR can contribute is people are now used to working from home. They are struggling to work over hours because you never know when to stop, and that's impacting mental health, and that's impacting general wellness. But also there are people who are discovering that they can do their work uninterrupted in a shorter period. So there are people who will start to come with a consultant mentality, like I really want to work for you for 3 days. So shaping those ideas already should be something that we need to start thinking about. The one thing that will change is how we repurpose the workplace. So the workplace as an office will definitely change. And I think that the workplace will become the place where people come to bond as opposed to do productive work. So how are we going to repurpose the workplace? We probably need to go and start creating more agile and more open places where when people come once or twice in a week, they're really meeting that end of bonding because they're already producing a lot when they're working from home. So thinking about the workplace, there's also the trend that will come out very strongly, and I think Edward alluded to it, is the health concerns. So mentor is in the forefront. How we deal with the mentor is at the forefront. But there's also policy on workplace. How will WIBA now start to work? And that's a place we need to start sitting to influence policymakers and law so that the workplace health, as we know it today in a secluded or controlled environment, is not being disadvantaged when people work from home. Digital adoption, those people haven't adopted digital in a great way the last 3 months. I don't think they'll emerge out of COVID. So HR leading adoption of technology for work is advice that I would give to people sitting in here. The game changer will be leadership. The game changer will be ironing for the future, not ironing for the old normal, and people being totally agile from a place of work, but also a place of culture and behavior.
Very interesting insights, John. You've talked a lot about how HR will provide leadership and driving productivity. And actually, as the members who are here were registering, they were asking, how can people really be able to measure their own productivity? How can HR drive productivity? especially when people are working from home? And also, how do we maintain morale? So I want to hear from Fred. This element of productivity keeps coming, and combining productivity with performance, and really how we're going to measure this. Fred?
I think the first thing we need to understand is, if you are in sales and you're meant to deliver a certain volume, that volume can be delivered whether you are in the office or you are out of the office. The jobs we do as HR professionals also can be delivered, at least a large portion can be delivered out of the office, maybe some in the office. And therefore, I'm worried when people start talking about changing goals because there is COVID. There's an extent to which you've got to understand that the business will have been affected in terms of what it can achieve this year. I understand that. Maybe because of the slowdown, you can expect that the results will be different. But in terms of the individual contribution one needs to make, what needs to happen is you need to ask, okay, fine, we are not able to meet X, but are we able to meet X minus 1? But the manner in which we achieve that should not change simply because there is COVID. I'm working remotely, but what am I meant to do? If I'm meant to employ somebody, I can still interview them. There's Zoom, there's video, there's audio, and in some cases, you may still ask someone to come and see you. So I cannot say that because the virus is here, I'm not going to deliver talent. Similarly, if it comes to following up performance, the conversations that you do have with your direct reports need to be scheduled. Some of them may still be face-to-face. Of course, you have to think about social distancing and masking and all the rest of it. But nothing stops you from scheduling those calls and asking how it is going. Unless somebody, we have held even disciplinary committee meetings, some of them purely online. So I think I agree that there's an extent to which we have to adopt digital way of working, but it doesn't mean that productivity itself is meant to be severely affected by the fact that you're working from a different location. This is a time to disabuse the myth that physical presence equals productivity. It isn't. And if you think about it and think, okay, now I may be limited in the extent to which I can humanly interact or have human connection with other people. Yes, I understand that. But it doesn't mean that I have no way of getting my things done. If we think it is possible, we will act differently from if we think that this virus has come to finish us. Imekuja kutumaliza. And therefore, we get debilitated, we don't move. But when we think to ourselves, what can I do now that I've got this impediment to still get my work done? You will find a way. If you can hold a disciplinary meeting, if you can hold a performance review meeting, if you can recruit someone, you can have an interview. If we can have a webinar like this, then it means that it is possible. Because I'm sure this is somewhere on your performance goals, perhaps, Agnes. And you can't give an excuse and say that you haven't done it. Here you are. So in terms of productivity, in short, I think there's still ways of getting people to perform. And I have seen that the numbers have changed in our own business, but that doesn't mean that we are not going to expect people to make a contribution and follow them up. I think the only thing I have to mention is that the approach that we use as leaders then has to be empathetic. And when we call to ask how far you've gone, sometimes we do forget to ask how the person is. We sometimes forget that the business will be well to the extent that the people who are in that business are well. So the idea of calling your team and just checking, how are you doing? How are you coping? Because you don't know, you can't see them. You need to do that, preferably on video, just to get a chance to see the person and ask them how they're doing. It makes a very big difference. We can still retain, to a large extent, our human connection, even as we pursue what we need to pursue in business. So I think we could still pursue productivity, maybe differently, but there's no excuse not to do what we ought to do.
Wow, Fred. So there's no excuse. So Emma, can you help us to structure the HR of the future? And as Emma is responding, I will also ask Edward to kind of tell us what should HR be demanding from the CEO and the top leadership in terms of support to make this happen?
Okay, thank you, Agnes. Okay, so leading on from Fred's points, obviously there's no excuse, which of course is very true. I think as Fred alluded to, it's really about the way of doing things, moving forward and having that humanity. So I would say there's 3 areas that I think HR should really be revolutionizing in moving forward. The first is focusing on employee experience. So we've often talked about employee engagement, but the shift now, the trend is really towards employee experience. So starting very much from, you know, your organization as a brand, what is the perception? And HR has an important role in that, because the recruitment processes and the way that you attract people has an important role in shaping that brand. So seeing it as a journey from where someone is recruited, working, and then also how you treat people when they leave, or, you know, other changes are happening. So it's really bringing that humanity to the employee experience, and it's really that remember the organizations that treated their people well and really put people first. And that is, you know, a really important point. The second one is around learning as a way of life. We're seeing that people are using their savings on the commute, things like that, to really enhance in their learning. So whether it be digital literacy, whether it is other skills enhancement, it is, you know, really building on their skills to build on the organization, but also build on their own development. And I think that will be a continuing trend, and HR has an important role in facilitating that and to be creative as well on that. Then the third one is well-being, which I touched on briefly earlier, but well-being, I would say, is a broader sense. So well-being, obviously health and safety first, right now, everything that is happening, but looking to the future, it goes beyond just health and wellness. It's also about financial wellness as well. How are we helping as HR people to, you know, be careful with their money and, you know, to conduct financial planning? Obviously mental wellness, but there's also the social wellness, you know, which is linked to the mental aspects. But if people don't go back to work in offices, you know, it's really how to help those social aspects. Then there's also looking at the trauma management side of things. You know, when we ease out of this pandemic and, you know, people go through different phases when it comes to trauma, people are facing different traumas in different ways. There's different approaches to managing and reflecting on that trauma. And I think HR has an important role to look at it in a positive way and to listen from the experience, to support people, and to really look at how people respond to trauma, what they can learn from it, and what is the best way of approaching people, because everyone, you know, responds to trauma in different ways. I guess I hand over to Edward now. Thank you.
Sorry, before Edward goes, I just want to throw in a question for John. I'm just listening in and realizing there's gonna be so much change to how we do HR. And John, I'd like to hear from a structure and policy perspective, how do we take this forward?
I think the best way to do HR would be to listen to what the business, to listen to how the business is responding, because HR will not craft anything that doesn't support the business. In my earlier conversation, we were talking about repurposing the vision and mission, the vision or the purpose of the organization, you know, and having an interim purpose. Now, when I listen to the leaders in our organization, when I listen to leaders in other organizations, the COVID is going to set back a lot of businesses, maybe 2 years, maybe 2.5 years. And therefore the trajectory that was set 2020 in terms of, I don't know what we call them business plans, the trajectory that we set in our business plans will need to be relooked. So the first step to structure and policy should be to start listening to where the business will go 2021 and ahead. Just let's start to listen. How far back are you set? If it's 2 years, then you start to rethink about policy that you had for manpower planning, for example. I was just thinking about our business plans now for 2021 going forward. Most organizations must start to rethink how they mix the structure of their employee workforce. Is it all going to be permanent? Is a lot of work going to be outsourced? Is there going to be a component of a contract and consulting work done and casual work being given out? So that's what I see. In terms of policies, I think policies will support remote working more. Policies will support peace work more. Policies will support wellness, and policies will support financial support directly to employees who choose not to work from the workplace. So if you know, if an employee deems my workplace as not safe, I can't force them to come. If an employee deems the workplace as not being, conducive, I can only put in measures and prove to them. But I cannot deny them the chance now, especially in the new reality, to ask them, is there another place you'd work from? Would you want to work from home? Would you want to be agile in terms of remote working? So I see a drive towards change of policy, and I hear you talking about structure, but I wouldn't want to prescribe a one size fits all in terms of what policies to change, what structures to change, until you harness the resources within to know where the business is going. So that's the first point. So if anyone wants to think about structure, please listen to where your business is going. Otherwise, you're going to have a policy for 1 year, or you're going to have a structure for 1 year, while the business has put on a trajectory of 3-4 years. Okay, but the overarching changes will be on skills on remote working, leadership that moves away from numbers to people, or a mix of both. We are starting to redefine community, by the way. We've redefined community, not the people who live around us, but people who live with us but are affected by COVID, for example. So we're starting to take COVID as contracts we stopped, casuals we stopped, distributors were not able to distribute as much as they used to do, besides going to Mukuru to give that kind of community support. So let's adopt a new thinking to the things that we thought were community. Let's adopt a new thinking to the things we thought were business, because all that is gone and gone forever, by the way. It's not coming back.
Wow, we are already in the future, John. Thanks for setting the pace. I mean, there's so much lessons coming out of this conversation. I don't even know how much Edward is going to cover in terms of what kind of support HR should be demanding from their CEO. Edward, over to you.
Yeah, Agnes, I think you just said it, that we are in the future. In December, in January, we were kind of in the workplace talking about the future of work. That future of work is what we have got now. And based on that, the key parameter, and I think we've discussed it, and as you rightly say, many of the things we have put them on the table, is that we are the ones, or people in HR are the one on the front line, which then means in the front line, as John said, about creating this future of work, And that said, and I'm just sharing on what we are doing at KCIC, and being the one who is championing, I hope is something that HR practitioners and others who are here, they can be able to present their CEOs for support. Well, the first and most important thing is that they must be able, or CEOs must be able to accept you as being on the front line. Being on the front line means, to what John was saying, that you need to listen to where, or to see where the business is going. And how can you be able to do that? You can only be able to do that if you are sitting in the management team and you are spearheading those kind of strategies there. If that is not the case, then you cannot be able to be able to have some traction in regards to that. But that said, I think there are three things that we need to focus on and that you can go and ask from your HR, from your CEOs. And number one is kind of what we call the work, okay? The second one is the workforce, which is the people. And the last one is the workplace. These are the three things that I think, being on the front line, you need to go back to your CEOs and make sure that they are supporting you in changing that, because this needs to be recalibrated. For instance, when you're talking about work, what are we talking about? I think it's John or Fred who was talking about consultants taking jobs and things like that. Work design will need to change. And is it going to change? The way we used to do things is not the same. It will be designed in a different way. For instance, if we used to do travel, again, work will not be done when you are traveling. There will be mechanism. And also, I think also we mentioned about the software and the hardware part of things. So companies and you as HR people, you need, again, to go back to your CEOs and ask for these investments, because you need a stable system that then can be able even to manage the performance, can be able to track what is happening within the organization, and can also be able to connect the staff, kind of having even drink cups on Zoom or whatever. But you need a platform to be able to do that. Of course, the second thing I talked about is the workforce. And within the workforce is about leadership and the culture that you need to create within your organization. The kind of culture we used to be on, that is definitely changing. So again, as I was saying, I spent 45 minutes having conversation with people over lunch. That is not going to happen in the near future. So we must be able to build a different kind of culture. And again, you are on the front line together with the CEO. They must be able to support you to push that forward. Of course, talent identification and talent processes, as I think it's Fred who was saying, that you can be able to interview on the phone. Next week, I'm interviewing 6 people on Zoom. Again, this is happening, So these all things need to be changed. And also in terms of benefit, I think it's Emma who was saying that we also need to check on the well-being, financial well-being of our staff. And there are many ways that can be readjusted and in relevance to the COVID-19 and to the crisis that we are in. Of course, then people's strategy operation plans, that also need to change. And finally, is about the workplace. I think also we talked about, and we have talked about all these points. I'm only giving them a structure. We talked about the office space and how does that look like, especially from safety and from healthy perspective. I think also is a question about the workstations. What kind of workstations are we going to have? Are we going to give people workstations at home? And how can that be funded? And how can we be able to recoup that investment? I think these are some of the things that I would urge you to have candid conversations with your CEOs, and hopefully they can be able to bear fruit, and productivity definitely will go up, because I've seen productivity in my organization actually going up. We have admitted more than 200 businesses in the last 3 months, 3 months during COVID. We couldn't expect that, and it's all done remotely. So it is possible, as Fred was saying, that things can be done and targets can be met. Of course, we need to be empathetic, and we need to put some empathy and some compassionate as we do our work. Thank you.
Very well put. In fact, Edward, you have just provided the structure to the conversation today. Define and redefine work, redefine the workforce, redefine the workplace. And just before I open the floor to question and answer, I want us to open this kind of the tough conversations happening in the office, and really to hear how we should be handling them. From layoffs, tough conversations, salary cuts. I was listening to HR conversations. Someone has already exhausted their leave for 2020. So they are now being advanced leave for 2021. How do we handle these tough conversations? This is to John and Fred. And also, you probably could tackle the question around how do we shield ourselves from the legal implications that come with all these tough decisions that HR have to really bear on behalf of the business.
I'll let Fred go first.
Yes, John, then Fred. Thank you.
Oh, John clearly wants me to go first. That's fine. There has been a lot of pain in this season because of people losing jobs, people having salary cuts, and leave going in the direction that you just described. And what seems to have made a difference for those people who have had greater success with these unfortunate exercises, it is because they already had some kind of goodwill with their employees. And goodwill in this form, that you keep your people aware of how the business is going in general. So if your people are able to say, this is how we are doing now, because we have been informed, that periodically you let your people know, this is how we are doing, this is what we can do to get better, and this is where our problems are. When you keep people informed like that, the day that your chips are truly down and that things have gone south entirely, you're also able to tell them that, look, this is how things look. We are not able to sustain activity as we have in the past, and we are going to have to take steps 1, 2, 3. This is how it's going to affect you. Now, am I trying to suggest that it's going to sound like music to them? No, but they will understand. It's not going to be less painful, but they are likely to understand where those decisions are emanating from. And when they do that, then whatever process you take and you're telling them that this is how we are going to separate, people are willing to listen when they know that, yes, I know nothing is being hidden. These fellows have been transparent. They've been telling us how the business is doing. We've hit the rock bottom. We've got to let some people go. I'm going to be affected. And when you consult people then you have to tell them. I mean, there may be occasions where you're asking who's willing to go. These are the terms. And there may be occasions when you have to take the hard choices of saying that you are one of those who are affected. You're going to have to leave. But that is an important issue that is soft and perhaps can be taken lightly. Informed, when you keep close to them, they will understand you. The pain will still be there. In terms of leave, I think people have dealt with it differently. If you can't work from home at all, then there's definitely a challenge. I can't think of how, for instance, a driver is going to drive by correspondence from home, seated in the office. I can't think that that hospitality assistant is going to serve you tea, seated in the comfort of their homes. It's not going to happen. There are certain people who are not able to come to the office. And if for instance, you need them away for a shift, then you've got to discuss about the leave. And there are many occasions where you might find that you're borrowing leave from days that you are not yet entitled to. That has happened. But knowing that these are not normal times, then the conversations that we need to have is not on the normal policy, because no one could have anticipated what we have right now. And if you had a sort of relationship or rapport with your people, you're able to come to a conclusion. This is not a legal matter as yet. And where you have that kind of discourse, you're unlikely to have repercussions that end up in expensive litigation, because people understood you. You are in touch with them. And the people who have probably faced the greatest difficulty are those that had no goodwill. What shall I say? This kind of social climate, the culture that you create within your organization is so important in matters like those, because then people are likely to understand this is happening because of A, B, C, D. So people should not take for granted the kind of relationship we have with our teams. Sometimes we think that we are related by results. Results are also related to the relationship. And there's a correlation in the sense that if you have a very poor relationship with someone who reports to you, the results will probably follow. So if you ask me, I will say it is extremely important what kind of culture you have already, because it's going to show up when the chips are down. And if people know that you truly value them, when the time comes to give them bad news, they are in a better position to absorb it than if they had no idea, they have reason to suspect that something is being hidden from them, or if we indeed engage them without empathy. The idea, our line managers need to learn how to have these tough conversations. If you have to tell someone they are going, don't just send them in there I think HR people have a role to play in coaching line managers on how to have these conversations, because it's not the kind of conversation that we are taught to have. You will not go to an academy and come out with a diploma of engaging someone through redundancy or through severance. This is something that you need to be helped with. And empathy doesn't come naturally to everybody. If you've worked long enough, that statement will be truer for you. I don't know what John wants to add to that.
Thanks, Fred. What I would say in matters of dealing with tough conversations is, first of all, to look at your policies and CBAs and any agreements that you have as tools that were created for normal times. So they may not apply in the new time. So I'll share a practical application. What we've done is to enhance us have honest conversations or tough conversations, that you call them, as we call them, Agnes, is at the beginning, we expressly said what you wanted to emerge as or not as. And we called out two things. We said we wanted to ensure that everyone was safe. And two, we say that we want to preserve jobs as much as we can. So when we ask people to go and work from home, and we ask them to bring on their laptops so that we can configure them to the company domain or network, it's because we could tell them that way it keeps you safe. Other than stay at work because you don't have a laptop, you'd rather bring your laptop and we configure it. So creating an interim purpose for us worked wonders, because we hinged on that. The second one, which Fred has alluded to in great detail, is communication. But it's open communication and engagement at all levels, because what we realized is when we write a memo or when we hold a town hall or online like this, not everyone was logging in. So the managers, the team leaders sort of knew what was happening, but the shop floor didn't know what supporting the community meant. They still expected to be on the road with Coca-Cola branded tanks and knee pushed hand washing basins. But engaging to the lowest level helped a lot. The leadership stepping out to be in the face is another thing that I've seen us apply all the time. So we will send out the comms, which will go out through the normal channels, but we try to get as many engagements through Teams or through other video conferencing tools that we have as much as possible. Now, the leadership being in the face gives two things. One is an assurance that, you know what, we've got the right people speaking to us, but also it gives a platform for people to ask questions that concern the heart, the fears, the questions that concern them personally, and not just facts about what profits you're making or what profits you're not making. So you get to hear questions about, what will happen to our jobs? What will happen to the people who tested positive? What happened to the people who we're going to do contact tracing for? So that for us has been a game changer. The other one is we've got, I think we've got a value that's called we act and think like owners all the time. I think that value was made for this time, because we go to the people and say, owners do not have an I take it all. You must give out something, you must take something, you must concede some ground if you're going to survive. You're going to concede something if you're going to have the purpose of retaining jobs or preserving jobs for the majority. So having those conversations and hinging them on what already exists has been very, very, very helpful. Concerning leave, it's been clear what you have, clear your balances. A driver will not drive remotely, so those conversations must be held as tough as they look. If you're not meeting your targets because your workplace is not a work from home, then you're gonna go for leave and exhaust, then we have other conversations. But it hasn't been one blanket rule because our industry has also been moving a bit slow. Litigation can come. Litigations will come for sure, because even when you do it very neatly, there will be someone who sees it as not neat, and therefore they will go to court. But the rule of thumb has been keep it neat and keep it human. if you're treating the people humanely, then you can defend it, because it means that you've taken care of not just what the law says, but also what humanity deserves.
All right, thank you very much, John and Fred. So I'm now taking up questions from the chat, and I have picked an interesting one. I think this is coming from Sarah, who's asking, what opportunities are you seeing for people with disabilities? Are we going to change our attitude towards them? And I would like Emma to speak about this. And also a related question is to those who are losing jobs. The other day I had people saying, you're ready for the axe. You could be the one axing or being the one who's been axed. And the second question is from Anne, who's asking about employees, that is ourselves, being ready to really, take the sad news or the hard news when they come, and kind of trying to make our mental shift to look for new opportunities that are emerging. So Emma, is our attitude changing towards the people with disabilities, and how can employees really shift their minds to kind of be ready to venture into the opportunities that are emerging?
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, very interesting question about disabilities. Thanks for that. I think it's a very interesting time for looking at how to provide more opportunities for people with disabilities, but also to promote inclusion, to really look at our workforce and to see, is it really diverse enough? COVID has provided a lot of opportunities with that, but also what we've seen happening around the world with Black Lives Matter means that we need, as HR leaders, to be facilitating those kinds of changes. So the opportunities I see for engaging people with disabilities are around technology. So there's more collaboration with technology. So it means that we can be much more flexible on when and how people can do their work. We don't necessarily need to be tied to, working office times, or, people coming to the office. People can work from home where they're comfortable. And it also provides more opportunities for more innovation. And also it can really complement different skill sets and help us to embrace different skill sets. So it can help organizations to critically think about what skills do we need in this next normal, and what skills could complement. So for example, there's some organizations that have many autistic people working for them because they bring a very unique skill set. And I think also building what has been talked about earlier, about more of a consultant, be segmented now. So it means that we don't have to have a whole job. So there's really an opportunity there to recruit people with unique skills, for people with disabilities, people from all walks of life, to do specific projects, to do part-time roles, to bring people on a temporary or part-time basis. And I think it can end up being a win-win. So, and then to go to the second question Anne was asking in terms of how to help staff shifting that mindset where they might be losing their jobs, taking sad news where they've been working for a long time, and this is a very difficult time, a mental shift. So how to help people prepare for that? I think it's trying to help people look at work in a different way. So looking at work in a project-based way, helping. I think there's also about training and supporting people prepare for the next step. So as has been the theme running through this session this afternoon, it's really about how you treat people with empathy. So, the way you deliver news, but also the support you provide. There's some businesses that I know that they have treated people so well when they've had to exit that they've actually helped them start off their businesses. They've helped them even get suppliers for their new businesses. They provided them with training, and the relationships have been so good even after the person has left that they've kept in touch. Sometimes they ended up going back to work for them, or they ended up being a client for them. So I think it's about looking creatively. Obviously resources, are very tight, so it's not easy, but to look at what does that person need, what would help them make that mindset shift. Maybe they still want to be an employee, or maybe they might need to move into business, or looking at different opportunities and trying to tailor what you can provide. And I think if there's job uncertainty, I think it's shifting that performance management focused to be more based on outcomes, and more project based can also help move to that consultancy mindset, and also to help people embrace there might be a need to do multiple jobs. We're likely to see much more of that gig economy continuing and to move across sectors. So employers also need to, as HR leaders, we need to look at how can we shift our processes to support that and to help employees also embrace that in the next normal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. I've got a question from Evelyn, and I'd like Edward to take this question. How best can HR implement workplace guidelines amid budget constraints? And Evelyn is working for the government, so she's wondering, with all these budget cuts coming, how can she still be able to implement the guidelines? And I guess, Edward, because of the nature of your work, you work a lot with funded projects. So if you're in a situation where you're relying on external funding, still, how do we manage these guidelines and still work perfectly, to bring in something that is going to help us in the new normal?
Well, Agnes, that's that's a tough one, because truly this is the reality. Just to give it some context, when COVID came, some of our donors immediately decided to remove $1 million from our operation. And that eventually was supposed to be given to the government of Kenya to be able to handle COVID-19. And indeed, at that point, what did we do? Obviously, is to try and figure out what are the areas that are irrelevant. I think John actually talked about that we don't have the luxury of doing the things we used to do. So quickly we needed to check on what are the things that we didn't do well, that we could do without, Things like, of course, travel was one big area that we used to spend quite a bit of money. And it's kind of, I'm taking, is it Esther or whoever asked the question, to budget 101, kind of going back to your budget and trying to see which are the most important thing and which are not the most important thing, and trying to allocate into that area. Of course, we are talking about safety here. And one of the things that I said, well, she's working for government, but I think also at government level, you can have that conversation where you are saying, well, the in charge or the CEO for that matter, of course, they need to understand that safety is key. And therefore, as we cut budgets, some of the areas where we shouldn't cut budget is where we are having safety of our people. I think I like what John said, that we must make it neat and human. I think that is what organizations should all be doing, even when they are talking about budget cuts. Those budget cuts must be made in a humanistic way, and they must be made in a neat way, and that way then we can be able to achieve the objective. It's very fortunate that we are talking about safety and health, well-being of people, and I think in government also they would be able to listen. This issue you're talking about, empathy and understanding and listening, they will be able, obviously, to allocate money there. So I wish my sister all the best, trying to negotiate for a bigger budget for that particular area. But I think also Agnes, just on an overall perspective, and something that I've been trying to preach, a gospel that I've been trying to preach in my organization. I think, irrespective of whether we are CEO, or whether we are HR, or whether we're marketing, I think we need, as management, to start thinking on ways how can we have our staff having a balanced life. We've been talking about workplace. We've been only talking about work, but work cannot be done when things like spirituality, things like health, things like family, things like friendships and networks, things like adventure, things like impact are not put into that equation. So we must be able to expound a little bit and look into ways, how can we actually be able to get the best from our employees, not only by having them work on their space, but also exposing them to all these other parameters and variables that will obviously contribute to the productivity within organizations.
Thank you very much, Edward. I know, Emma, you could give it a shot also. How can those who are in government and the NGO space really maneuver their way and still be able to provide a leadership in HR?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So looking at the NGO perspective, maintaining the HR leadership, I think it's really about role modeling the culture and to facilitate the culture that is needed. There might be some aspects of the culture that, you know, were working well and some aspects that were not working well, and trying to really, you know, embrace what needs to happen moving forward. And so, and try to, I would say also, trying to coach the leaders as well. So building coaching into the culture, and also trying to encourage managers to coach and empower their employees, because as it was already mentioned earlier in the session, micromanagement is not going to work going forward, and micromanagement does not work when you're working from home. So people need to be empowered. People need to know that their opinions are valued and that they have something, that their contributions are valued. So I think HR leaders have a really important role in that area, both in terms of the culture and also in terms of building the capacity and empowerment through coaching.
Thank you very much, Emma. To our panelists, I'm going to be asking you to give us your final parting shot, because we are coming to the tail end of our session. But just before I do that, I know you probably will need a second to organize your thought around it. I would like to just invite our attendees to our HR Summit, which is coming up next month. And the theme of this HR Summit is to redefine the future of work in the new normal. So these conversations will continue to go on, and I think we are already into the future. So let's talk about how it looks. And so as we get to the tail end, I know our panelists have been on the hot seat. So I want us to just close, and I will start with John. What's your final parting shot around our topic today?
So I think, look, when I interview people, especially at senior level, they're always telling me, you know, I'm futuristic, you know, I am innovative. And they give all this nice vantage point of the future. And the future is now, you know, whatever we call the future is here. When you think about what they say they will do in the future, bringing an agile workplace, bringing an agile culture, bringing whatever it is they said they would bring into the workplace, apart from losses, I see it happening now. So we should lead as such. We should lead like we're in the future. We shouldn't sit down and start to advise our CEOs, you know what, I don't have a budget. You know what, I don't have enough manpower. You know what, I need more time. So there's no other future that we're gonna have other than the future we have now. So let's go for it. Let's go for gold, because I would say we are made for times like this.
Great, we are in the future. Let's live in it. Thank you, John. Edward, your final parting shots?
Well, mine is just to reiterate the fact that people in HR, you will still be the ones on the front line, and you'll be the one who will be championing this, the change and the future, and helping us to cope and to be able to make our business to be productive. Of course, I want to say that it is important that all the issues that you're bringing to your CEOs, that they should be based to some extent with some facts. Of course, we like facts. In fact, there is this saying that in God we trust. For everybody else is facts on the table, you know. So my case is that let's build the case with facts and be able to put it onto our CEOs, and for sure they will be able to support, because we are indeed the ones on the front line. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edward. God plus facts. Interesting. Emma?
Thank you. So for my parting shot, I would say that as HR leaders, going forward, we need to be responsive and agile. So the HR strategy shouldn't be a static document. It needs to be responsive. And as the business continuity planning is happening, the HR strategy needs to be moving just at exactly the same pace. So you need to be ready to move fast and to keep on shifting things, and to be willing to experiment and see what will happen. So the days of a big employee engagement survey, for example, once a year, once every 2 years, that might have to change. You know, you might be doing things much more quickly, a few more questions, and just being in touch with what is really happening and being responsive, being in touch with people, not to be far removed. You need to be really we need to be human, and we need to be in touch with people to understand what is happening and to be relatable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. I pick 4 things: move, shift quickly, experiment, and be in touch with people. And finally, from Fred, as we close.
Thank you, Agnes. I'm going to mention 2 things. One is, I think, what we ought to concentrate on as HR people. Are we helping our businesses have a solid business continuity plan? A plan that recognizes that everyone, including your key talent, are just as susceptible as anyone. The second one is to coach our leaders in order to learn how to lead at distance. How can they change the way they interact with their people in managing them? Aware that the relationships that you have between line managers and their direct reports are crucial for their engagement, for their learning, for their experience. The other one is we as HR people need to be evangelists for taking precautions in the office. Educating people on, for instance, keeping a mask on doesn't cost money. Buying a mask costs more than educating them to keep it on and encouraging them to keep on. We've got to be evangelists for taking precaution. And the basis of that is because if the employees are well, the business has a chance to be well. Lastly, I think we ought to step back, not just as employees, but as human beings, and see how vulnerable we really are. And this is an opportunity for us to get acquainted with that discomfort that comes with thinking about our vulnerability, our mortality. And that forces us to think about the things that really, really matter in this life. Before the whistle is blown for you, what do you want to have done? What's truly important? And then finally, we need to recognize that no season lasts forever. Even this will pass. Thank you, Agnes.
Wow, thank you very much, Fred. You have picked out very many things: solid business continuity plans, coach our leaders, be an evangelist, and let's accept that vulnerability is real, and therefore realize that there's no season that will remain forever. So let's take this, it shall come to pass, but let's take the right decision. So thank you very much to our panelists. I can't even try to summarize what has been covered in the last 90 minutes or so. And so I really, really want to thank each one of you for being part of these riveting conversations. I want to invite our audience. At some point I checked and it was at nearly 110. Let's give them a thumbs up and a great clap, and appreciate them for what they have done this afternoon. We really thank you. And also to our audience, thank you very much for tuning in. And I'm sure there are many, many other webinars coming through from Strathmore Business School. So we encourage you to keep checking. There are very many questions I was not able to front to the panelists. In the interest of time, I tried to do the best I could, and therefore the conversation continues. Before you step out, please give us probably your one key takeaway, and we hope to meet you in the upcoming webinars and also at the HR Summit. Thank you very much and have a lovely afternoon.